Hi there, welcome to Floating in Books. Today's video is going to be an overview of winter book recommendations. So if I had to give you some wintry reads, what would be them? And I have 10 books to share with you today. So thank you so very much for watching me again today. I come on here once a week to talk about books or lifestyle, fashion related things. This month is quite book heavy because I thought why not share a overview of some perfect wintry books. Now granted, not all of the books that I'm sharing with you today are books I have personally read, but either the cover or the premise or just the title already gives me very wintry vibes. So I've got a whole mix of things here. So let me just get to these recommendations because I've got quite a lot. Something I haven't read yet, let's just start there, but something that the cover. It's The City of Woven Streets by Emmi Itaranta. I believe this is a Finnish author as well, so I'm not sure if it really has to do anything with winter or anything like that, but it definitely seems to be a very wintry theme, the way the cover is laid out. And this is a fantasy standalone, I think. I'm not sure if this is a series. I bought this years ago and I was like looking for books that I could feature in this video. I was like, maybe I should prioritize this. It's not a really big book either. Let me see how many pages this has. Yeah, this is just over like 320 pages. So this sounds good. It's about a girl, I think. It just says here, the blurb in the back is, in the city of woven streets, human life has little value. You practice a craft to stay alive, or you are cast out. So this sounds like sort of like medieval kind of caste system, or like, you know, where you learn a craft to become part of like a certain guild. Is that the name in English as well for it? Seems to be that sort of premise, and there's something to do with a sea. I don't know. There's a mystery involved. It sounded like something I might like, but I've just never gotten around to picking it up. But this is definitely one that still intrigues me enough. I never got rid of it from my shelf because I was no longer interested in it. This is definitely still one where I read the blurb and I go, oh yeah, I should read that at some point. Then something I did read, and as I was browsing my shelves to find books to recommend, I was like, oh, but I tend to associate, like if I've read a book, I tend to associate the season that I read the book in with that book, and not necessarily like, oh, this has really wintry vibes, but this is a winter recommendation for me because I read it into winter time. I read this one year between Christmas and New Year's. This is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. It is one of my favorite all-time historical novels. It's a story set in World War II where we meet a boy and a girl and we see the war through their perspectives and they sort of work towards each other, you could say. The girl is the main character for a good part of the story, and she is blind, and her dad works at the Museum of Natural History, and in order to get her to know the streets of Paris where they live, he has built her this miniature street section so that she can figure out where everything actually is. They have to flee because of the war, and then they go to this coastal area where her dad does the same thing again. And there's a bit of a mystery at the heart of this as well, and this like story of these two characters that we get to see and get to know very intimately. So yeah, it's about resistance, it's about the Second World War, it's about a mystery. It's not really a love story per se, but we do get two characters where it's like hinted at that they could be if they hadn't met in other times. But yeah, it's a really, really stunning story, and I really enjoyed watching this. It says here on the front that it was also the winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 2015. I think rightly so. I think if there is a season where you're going to get stuck in with a good classic, it's going to be the winter time. Wuthering Heights. I was like, what's a good wintry time sort of read? I was like, Wuthering Heights. The moors, the gloom that this book has as an atmosphere at its forefront is just what makes it super wintry to me. Granted, this is another one that I have yet. Like, I read this when I was at college, like when I was at university for a course. So it's been like 20 years probably since I read this. So maybe I should give it another whirl. But yeah, I kind of know quite well what this is about, and it's not the easiest of books to read, but yeah, that's why I think classics are a great one. You're stuck indoors, it's cold, it's wintry, maybe a bit rainy like we've been having here, and then these kind of books I think make for perfect reads. But I think that the wintertime is also great to read some fantasy, and I was like, you know what? Wintertime and Neil Gaiman, they kind of go hand in hand for me. So Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, I think is a great one to get stuck in. And the reason why I think this is very wintry is because it's such a whimsical read that it can really help you forget how dreary the world is outside. So Neverwhere has this fantastical element to it that I really enjoyed. It's very sort of Alice through the looking glass, kind of Alice in Wonderland falling down a tree kind of thing, where we meet our main character and he finds out what happens when people fall through the cracks, and there's this entire world below the streets of London where this actually takes place, and that's what Neverwhere refers to. So yeah, if you like these like whimsical kind of magical realism kind of stories, then that's something that Neil Gaiman is very good at. His stories are always sort of one foot in what reality offers you, and then one foot in a magical dream world that is usually pretty absurd. But I felt there were a lot of like similarities to something like Alice in Wonderland with this one, and I thought it was a very enjoyable read also for that reason, but it's also a very easy, fast-paced read to get stuck into. Another book I haven't read is Uprooted by Naomi Novik, but what I know from this book is that it's sort of like Eastern European fairy tale-esque in its vibe, and that really appeals to me. And I think, you know, Eastern European, I'm not sure if it's always covered in snow, but in my brain it is. Maybe I'm just going off of stereotypes here, but yeah. This, I believe, is about a village where there is a monster nearby that claims a girl from the village every time, and we follow one of the girls that one year is selected, and I believe that actually isn't a monster but a wizard. I don't know what this is about. I do know that Naomi Novik is a book author who is very much loved in the online book community. I've never read anything by her. I have the first book in that Scalaman series. What was it called? It's somewhere around here. Where did it go? I don't know where it went, but I have some other Naomi Novik books, but I've just never gotten around to reading them. But yeah, this is definitely, I think, a nice wintry read. I already mentioned loving some magical realism this time around, and I think The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern is a great one to get stuck into. This is not a short read. This is quite a big book, and this is a very beloved book, again, in the online book community. I like this, but I think for other reasons than what most people like it for. There is a bit of a love story in this one, but I feel that that's not the main part of the narrative. The main part of the narrative is how the circus comes to life, and it just has a very whimsical sort of magical realism thing to it. If you don't know what this book is about, it's about two magicians who are competing against each other to find out who is best. And as their ultimate challenge, they find two sort of apprentices, you could say, each, and then they have them compete in something called the Night Circus, and it becomes this whole thing with this cultural phenomenon attached to it, with people who are fans, who wear their red scarves. That's why there's a red scarf at the front. We get the story being told from several perspectives, and one of the perspectives, I believe, is a boy that lives very close to where the circus lands every time, and then as he grows up, he visits the circus more often, and he becomes quite an important character in the book as well. This is just a very clever book. It's very whimsical, very pretty. I love the writing of this as well, and I think that this is just a really great wintry read. Like this and a cup of hot cocoa, and you're good to go. I mean, I'm not sure if it's just because this book has winter in the title, but this, I don't know much about this. This is A Winter's Promise by Christelle Dabot, and I've heard this being described as like the Claire de Lune series, but here it says The Mirror Visitor, so I don't know. I have 3 of the 4 books that are out in this series. I believe it is a 4-book series, so I probably will be picking up book 4 as well. I've never read this yet, but I've heard great things. It's apparently about a school for magic, but it also somehow has to do with like the Tower of Babel. I'm not entirely sure what this is about, but it sounded like something really cool. I believe the author is originally French-Canadian, so that's definitely something differently for me as well. It's not a huge book, and this is a hardcover. It's about 400, like close to 500 pages, but I also found this in the YA section, so I don't think it's too difficult to read for that reason. So yeah, it is a YA fantasy, and it's about a magical school. That's all I know, but I'm intrigued. I love a good bit of fantasy in the wintertime, to be quite fair. I mean, again, fantasy books tend to be bigger, so it's a great moment in time to get really stuck into a fantasy series, I feel. One of my most recent raved about books, if there is a fantasy series that I would recommend you get stuck in pronto if you haven't read it yet. Mistborn by Sanders Sanderson. This is the first book, The Final Empire. I am currently in the midst of reading book number 2. I can tell you already, and I'm already loving every minute of it. This book had its flaws, for sure. It's not perfect, but oh boy, does it make up for it in the latter half of the book. The first 2/3 of this book it's just slow. It's a very slow-paced book, but then you read the ending and you're like, wait, what? Everything actually did have to happen in order for us to get to this point. I feel that the first 2/3 are more character-driven. It puts you on the wrong foot very deliberately as well, so that you don't really see the ending coming. So this is a very good fantasy world. It's a very rich world as well, right from the start, but without you really having to do any effort to really get to become familiar with the world, I feel. So we are introduced to this world quite seamlessly, if I feel. With some fantasy stories, I can sometimes take a little bit of time getting used to the world building, but in this it's done quite cleverly, and I feel that this is much more about our characters and who they are as people, so that in the second book we get to see more of this world, and I definitely feel that that's where the second book is going to go. I've only read 100 pages so far, but I think that the hype for this one is definitely real, and I would definitely recommend if there's a fantasy series that you get stuck into, if you haven't yet, or maybe if you're due a reread, make it this one. And then finally, another book that I haven't read yet. This is Catherine Arden's The Bear and the Nightingale. This is a 3-book series. This is the first book. I have the entire series, and it's still on my to-read list. Like Naomi Novik, I have heard that this book is very much inspired by Russian fairy tales, and I believe this is also set in like a wintry setting. It has to do with a girl and a bear in a forest. That's all I know. A lot of people love this. I'm not sure if this is YA or adult. I'm pretty sure it's adult fantasy. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, this again seemed like something that I might really enjoy. And because of the setting and this Russian folklore inspired story, that I think I'm gonna love it as well for that. I love a bit of folklore and mythology based stories for sure, so I could not include it here. And the final book I want to recommend is this, and this is The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. Now, I believe that this is called The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle in the US. I'm not sure. It has different titles in different places. I do know that. I did read this in the summertime, but I was like, you know what? The vibe this gives, it's like murder mystery, whodunit kind of detective story, but it has a magical realism element. It feels a bit like The Hunger Games at times as well. And I just think that this is a great book to get stuck into on a cold winter's day, because I remember reading this in a day. It's quite a big one. Again, it's a hardback. So this is, again, just over 500 pages. But this is really fast-paced. I remember flying through this. What happens in this story is that our main character is part of this game, it seems, but that's not revealed until later. But he wakes up in a different body every time of these people who are being invited to a party to celebrate Evelyn Hardcastle's birthday, and she dies every single time at the end of the day. And then the next day, he wakes up again in a new body, having to figure out who did it, what happened here. And there's a mysterious character at play here. This is such a good one, and I think it's such a great one for this time of year for sure. So if you were looking for something good to read that is a bit different from the usual, I think this book got a lot of hype when it first came out, but I've never really heard anybody talking about it ever since. But this is one that I still rate very highly, so I definitely would recommend this one. That's it. Those are the 10 books I wanted to recommend to you when it comes to my perfect wintertime reads. I think these books either have a really great wintry setting, or I think the stories can really work with a wintry vibe. Like if you just want to feel warm and cozy and a little bit of mysterious, then I think all these books have something whimsical, magical, mysterious to them for sure. So I would definitely recommend all of these. Let me know in a comment down below what books you think are perfect for the winter time. I would love to know. And in the meantime, just give the video a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more by me. I come on here once a week, as I've already mentioned. So without further ado, I hope you have a great week. See you next week when I post my new video. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.